Welcome, everyone. We'll give folks a moment or two to log on, and then we'll get started. Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Chelsea Lake, and I'm a member of the events team at Politics and Prose Bookstore, and I'd like to welcome you to PMP Live. Thank you for joining us in this virtual format in the midst of these extraordinary times, throughout all of which we strive to bring you the authors and books we all love to our Politics and Prose community. At any point during the event, you can click on the link that I'll be putting in the chat to purchase Early Morning Riser on the Politics and Prose website. Additionally, you can ask Katherine Heiny a question by clicking on the Q&A, which can be found near the bottom of your screen. We'll try to get at everyone's question, but we apologize in advance if we don't have time to address yours. We are delighted to offer closed captioning for this event via Zoom's auto captioning service. To access captions, click on the live transcript option. Look for the CC image at the bottom of your screen. Finally, we want to thank you again for being with us today, and it is now my pleasure to introduce tonight's speakers. Katherine Heiny is the author of Standard Deviation and Single Carefree Mellow, and her short fiction has appeared in the New Yorker and the Atlantic, among other magazines. She lives in Bethesda, Maryland with her husband and children, and is a former resident of London, The Hague, and Boyne City, Michigan. Heiny will be in conversation with Justine Kennan, the editor and producer for NPR's All Things Considered. Please join me in welcoming them both to PMP Live. Take it away, ladies.
Thanks so much. I'm so excited to be here tonight with Katherine. We actually met 6 years ago at her first book event at Politics and Prose. And so for all of you who showed up tonight, showing up is an awesome thing to do for books and for authors. And sometimes you make a friend out of it. So that's what I wanted to say. And just a little warning that I have kids and a dog, and I'm on Connecticut Avenue in Washington, D.C. So there might be some ambient noise, but I'll do my best to hit mute when I can. Katherine.
Well, in pre-pandemic times, I always started book events by thanking everyone for coming and saying that I knew how easy it was to stay home in your pajamas and watch Netflix. And one day, a woman in the front row said, "And drink gin straight from the bottle." And now everybody is home in their pajamas, hopefully, and they can drink gin straight from the bottle if they want. But I still thank them so much for coming, especially when everybody has so much screen time in their lives. The fact that people would come out a little more to support my book is so fantastic to me. So thank you, everyone.
Yay! And I'm so excited we get to talk about this book. This is Katherine's third Early Morning Riser. I'm going to hold up my copy, which you will buy at Politics and Prose. And it's her second published novel. So I want to jump in a bit. And you know, we don't want to give anything away. We want to keep you lured in. But I will start by asking Katherine some questions. And I'll just give you a little picture of the book, which is that it's set in Boyne City, Michigan, which is why it was important to mention that Katherine had lived there before, which is quite a small town. And there's quite a few characters, and all the characters are woven together in this just delicious way. So I want to know, Katherine, where did this book start for you? Was it Boyne City? Was it with a main character? Was it a particular relationship? Where did the book start for you when the little seed was starting to get planted?
It was sort of a character and a moment. I had wanted to set a book in Boyne City, and the first book that I set there, I couldn't make it work. It was about a brother and sister who hire somebody to get in a car accident with their aging mother because they want her to stop driving. And I couldn't make that work, but the man that they hired was this sort of local Lothario woodworking guy. And I really liked him, so I stopped that novel, but I kept him. And then I knew I wanted the new novel to be told from the new woman in his life, and that she would have to deal with somebody who slept with basically the whole entire town. And I was sort of thinking, what do I want this character to be, this main woman? And my son's third grade teacher told me a story about how the DEA got a tip that the house next to her was growing marijuana and selling it. So they kicked down that door, but they got the address wrong, and they actually kicked down his teacher's door. And so she and her husband called at school and had to go home and deal with the DEA and their splintered door. And it was pajama day, so they had to do it in their pajamas. And that made me so happy that I decided right then and there that the main character would be an elementary school teacher, and the novel would open on pajama day. And the car accident stays in there too, although in very different form.
Yeah. That is. And so the main character is the teacher is Jane. She teaches second grade. And then Duncan is her who comes to save her on her front step when she's sitting there in her pajamas. And he has a great line where he says, "How long have you been sitting here?" Because it's, quite late in the afternoon. We'll get back to him in a minute. But describe, for those of us, I have total faith that this is Boyne City, in that, having read your books that have take place in places where I have been. I've never been there. I've been New York City and Florida, and I just have total faith that I would open a door and there would be Boyne City, and I'd be like, yes, I know this place because I spent 300 pages there. So, but can you describe Boyne City for people who haven't read the book and or haven't been there?
It's easy to describe, but it's hard for me to communicate what a special place it is to me. I grew up in Midland, Michigan, and we always went on vacation in northern Michigan. And then my husband and I moved around a lot for his job, so we bought a summer house there. And then we began spending every summer there when our children were very little. And actually, both my sons took their first steps in Boyne City. My younger son in a bar called The Sportsman, which is actually in the novel.
Yeah.
And he was sort of an early walker, and we think maybe he was eager to get his hands off the sticky floor. So it was probably like a good piece of parenting.
So that's going in your parenting book?
Yeah. And it's sort of a cliche to say that small town life is slower. I'm not sure I would say it's slower, but it's certainly easier. And just going there was very relaxing. I always felt like everything was manageable. And the rhythm of the days was quite different because it was summer, and Boyne City has the most beautiful sunsets in all the world. And
it's right on a lake. Is it Lake Michigan?
It is. It's on Lake Charlevoix.
Charlevoix. Okay.
Yeah. And actually on the 4th of July, everybody walks down to the beach and watches the fireworks over the lake. And there's a playground at the beach with a merry-go-round on it. And when my sons were little, they rode the merry-go-round, and bigger kids pushed it. And then when they were bigger, they pushed it. So literally like 70 kids get on this merry-go-round, and then it goes faster and faster and becomes like a class action lawsuit of a merry-go-round. That's sort of the beauty of Boyne City, is things happen there that don't necessarily happen elsewhere. And it's just one of my favorite places in all the world.
Did that make it harder to write about? Because it's very much a character in the book, or very much, like I said, you feel like Boyne City, even though it's a place and not a person. That make it harder to write about because you love it, because it's so close to you?
No, I think that made it easier because it is just so special to me, and I have so many memories there. We actually did have to cut some sunsets from the book because my editor was like, they're on sort of every other page. But and the light in northern Michigan, it's just really different. Twilight there is different than it is anywhere else.
Nice, very nice. And I mean, and also we should say, you know, Jane obviously spends, I mean, they live there all year round, and you acknowledge that that is not the easiest place to be in deep winter, and dress fashionably.
I grew up in Michigan, so I do know, you know, the Michigan winters, and it can be very, very intense and very isolating.
Okay, great. So Jane is new to town. She's the teacher. She meets Duncan. I think it's hard to, and then she also, there's just this cast of characters that like shouldn't work, but do. There's Frida, who's a competitive mandolin player. There is also Duncan's ex-wife, Aggie, who, again, it shouldn't make sense that his ex-wife is totally entwined in his life, but she is, and it totally makes sense and is super believable. I'm not giving anything away. And her husband, who is a very difficult person to be around, and they all stick with him. And there's Jimmy, who works for Duncan and is also, he's intellectually challenged, and yet is, you know, just right in there with the rest of them. And this like menagerie of people who wander in and out of each other's homes and jobs, and in their business, there's things like, oh, I saw where your truck was parked, so therefore I know this, you know, I know this about you. So there's just like, it puts Neighborhood Watch like sort of on steroids. So in terms of that, you knew you wanted a Duncan character, and then that Jane, the school teacher, was going to be a relationship. What were some of the other relationships that you were, as you were sort of mapping this out, where did you go next?
They were actually sort of arbitrary, and his first wife,
she's so good,
is very, very bossy.
Yeah.
She was sort of bossy as a character. She just like plowed in there, and I had to make room for her. And in fact, after the book was written, when it was being copy edited, there was one line that it was slightly ungrammatical, and it was a line of dialogue that Aggie said. And the copy editors kept wanting me to change it. And I was like, I can't. Aggie will be mad at me. Like, I'm scared of Aggie along with everyone else. And her husband is very peculiar and has a lot of eccentricities. And when I was writing the early chapters, a friend of mine read it and said that he thought that Aggie I was talking about how like Gary's likes and dislikes as a way to make him sound more interesting. And so then that was like throwing down the gauntlet for me. I just wanted to make him as weird as possible. But he was sort of like a gift I gave myself. Whenever there was a reason for Gary to be there, I knew he would say completely random, perplexing things. And it was really fun.
And yet he remains on the inside, right? He's still intertwined with these folks. And there's no, I mean, that's what's so lovely too, right? Is everyone still is, to me, I mean, everyone's so intertwined, despite or because of all these eccentricities, which was super lovely.
Well, and it was very important to me that Gary just be weird, but not have an actual diagnosis, because I think it's part of the beauty of small town life. It certainly has the flip side of everybody's like in your business all the time. But there's a part very early in the book where Jane's mother says, "What's wrong with Gary?" And Jane says, "Nobody really knows."
He's scary.
Nobody really, it's just scary.
He's just scary.
Exactly.
Well, I want to give everyone a little bit of a sense about the book, if we may. Are you ready to do a little bit of reading from it? Would that be okay?
Jumping straight to that. Okay.
I want to just to give a little sense of that, if that's okay. And then we'll jump back into questions, just because I want to, I want everyone to hear a little bit about it. And I just want to remind everyone, while Katherine finds her place in the book, is please go to the Q&A section if you have a question. You can't ask them out loud, but I will read them for you. And we'll be getting to those in a little bit. So, but if you put them there, then we will get to them for sure. So I'm going to mute myself so we can hear a little bit of this book now.
Okay, I'm just going to read a very small section. And I think it stands alone without me having to explain it too much. It had been so long since Jane had gone to a dinner party that she'd forgotten how awful they were. well, maybe not awful, but certainly exhausting. You book a sitter and feed the children early and get dressed up and figure out who's going to be the designated driver and go over to someone's house. And by the time you've finished your first and only glass of wine, you've already listened to another guest tell you about their gluten allergy, and you realize that it's hours and hours before you can go to bed. I also realized while writing this book that writing about dinner parties gone wrong is my favorite thing to write about. And it's a miracle the whole book isn't one long dinner party. I do find them to be like a very strange sort of thing that we do as people.
Tell me more about that. I mean, I figure if, people always ask the question, like, who would you have at your dinner party? If you could have anyone there. I am guessing you would have people who might clash, would you?
Oh.
You know what I mean? Would you have people who would absolutely just sort of not get along, or who would you like?
Write a story about it later? Probably. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be fun. I have to think about that. I do think, in your other books, there's definitely the gathering moments are the ones that I'm thinking of, and standard deviation, the room party, the classroom parent potluck or whatever it was. That was a great evening. That was quite a great evening. If anyone that hasn't read that yet.
I'm a big fan of Laurie Colwyn, and one of her books and one of her cookbooks, she writes that her favorite moment of any dinner party is when everybody goes home. Well, I can see that.
And the thing is, and Jane has this, because Jane is much younger than Duncan, and she really wants to get this adult thing right. She has a lot of fantasies about what a dinner party would be, what would be kind of cool and hip and retro, and kind of set the right mood to show everybody she knows what she's doing. And then Aggie just kind of swans in and does it better or whatever.
Well, also in the first dinner party that Jane throws, she thinks she's inviting a mix of people who've never met, and it turns out that they all know each other and have complicated histories, which I think is really part of small town life. There's no true unknown.
It's true. I think that's a great bit. Well, let's get to, I want to get a little bit to Duncan, who, again, on the face of Duncan, of it, I feel like I shouldn't like Duncan so much, because who is this guy who just he's not shy about the fact that he's pretty much slept with, everybody in town, as you say. And he, they'll go, no matter where they go in town, they run into somebody or somebody, sometimes it's a couple of people at a time, with whom he slept. And it's not scandalous. It's just sort of par for the course, and that's Duncan, So tell me, how do we like him? How did you think about him being likable or unlikable?
Well, to me, Duncan is totally redeemed by he hires Jimmy Jellicoe, who's intellectually disabled, to work at his shop, even though Duncan's shop is not very functional and barely makes money. And he's just so loving and respectful of Jimmy that he was totally redeemed for me as a character. But also, I feel like Duncan's really easygoing. And right. And there's one of the characters says early in the novel that if you're not trying to date Duncan, he's great. And I really liked the idea of he's not a villain. He's just kind of himself.
I was at the Times today that said, check out Katherine Heiny's write-up in the Times today, that said that you don't have villains in your book. And I hadn't thought about that in this book or the other book, the other novel, that there aren't people to hate. There aren't bad guys. There's just sort of different characters and different characters interacting. Had you thought about that before they wrote that?
I hadn't thought about that, but usually by the time you write a character and you get to know them so well, it's hard to make them a villain because you've grown so attached to them.
Right. He's good. Well, let's another totally delightful character who just is Frida, who's the competitive mandolin player. Let's talk a little bit about her and also the role of music in the book. Yeah, I feel like you should make your own Spotify for this book.
I did.
No, you did not.
Yeah, I did.
While you were working on it, or that it's coming out soon?
Well, it's coming out soon, but while I was writing the book, I did have a sort of playlist going. And because I'd come up with this character who's addicted to playing the mandolin, and she's sort of a Greek chorus for their lives, and she sings out songs that are always really appropriate for the moment, but maybe you're having like a sad day and you don't necessarily want someone singing this lugubrious song in the background. And each chapter has, many songs are mentioned, but each chapter has one song where the lyrics are quoted. And that gave me a lot of pleasure, because with folk music, and possibly with all music, there's a song written about exactly what you're going through. It's not like there's a song that's sort of close. It's like there's a really precise song. So searching for those songs was really fun. And I thought I had made Frida totally up. And then I was telling my friend about how when I first brought my husband home to meet my parents before we were engaged or married or anything, my parents came out to the airport to meet us, and they brought my godparents. And
this is in Michigan.
Yeah, and my godfather brought his ukulele, and he'd written a song about me and Ian, and my parents and my godparents sang it together in the airport. And I was telling this story as like, how amazing is it that my husband married me after this, that he didn't just like get on a return plane. And she was saying, well, your godfather must be the inspiration for Frida. And I had never put those two things together, but clearly he was. And he plays the ukulele a lot. And I've always loved it when he does, and I love it when he sings. And I know he's watching tonight, and today, my pub day, is his 91st birthday. So his name is Gilbert Harder, and I want to give him a shout out and a thank you for really a lifetime of inspiration.
Oh, that's terrific. Happy birthday. Wow. But is this, well, two things. One, you have to, just to give people a sense of what we're talking about, is the Frida's not only competitive about the mandolin, she's sort of she's like a super aggressive mandolin player. Like she sort of doesn't understand like a moment where her mandolin isn't in need, right? I mean, it's sort of but also there's this moment where she has this like she's the woman who's the organist, and she can't, who she's competitive with also, and she just can't, she just is like, throws up her hands, like who would, at the church, I'm blanking on her name, but there was just this great exchange. Did that just come to you, or how did that, or did you, because like she can't sort of encounter another musician without letting you know that they don't have it.
Yeah, without feeling super threatened. And, I think that Frida's mandolin playing is really a blessing and a curse for Jane. And there is a point late in the book where Jane actually wishes that Frida had never learned to play the mandolin. But I think that she's exaggerated, but I do think that musicians are often very competitive.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I know, it's funny because there's something sort of benign about a mandolin, and yet it's like, her armor. Yeah. And they have a very sweet relationship. Frida is a teacher also at the school with Jane, and they have a great friendship, which there's very, very good girlfriend, friendship, which is great. Let's talk a little bit more about Jimmy Jellicoe, who he's a terrific character. He's mentally challenged. He's and he's obviously as complex as anybody else in terms of how he lives his life. But I feel like that's not something that generally gets explored in fiction, unless it's like that's the main character and that's what it's all about. But he's just sort of a fact of life and folded into this like this family of people who aren't necessarily family. So talk a little bit about what you were working on with him, or what you had hoped, or when did he appear for you in this book?
Well, Jimmy sort of came about by accident because at the first dinner party that Jane has, I wanted a group of people. So I thought, well, she would invite Jimmy's coworker. I mean,
Duncan's.
coworker. But Duncan's business model is so lackadaisical that I was like, it's not likely that his assistant is going to be a real go-getter. So it just sort of made Jimmy the opposite and intellectually disabled. And I also liked the idea that in this small town, everybody just says Jimmy is slow learning. There's no need for them, they feel, to dig further. And
or diagnose or label or
or even really interfere and help.
Right.
It's just kind of like everybody out for him. But it was, as Jimmy became a larger and larger character in the book, it was so important to me that he be a complex person and a kind and decent man and really worthy of love, and not just be his intellectual disability. And he was so much fun to write because I think he really, despite his learning difficulties, he's very insightful.
Right.
And, it was kind of interesting to see what Jimmy might see and remark on when no one else would.
Yeah. No, and really he is the glue in this little business. I mean, really nothing I think would happen without Jimmy being like, hey, Duncan so-and-so called, like he's there, he's answering the phones, he's very diligent, like, so he's a wonderful character. He's super great and real. Well, I want to get to something else which is similar, but we talked a little bit yesterday, getting ready for today, and you seemed not too convinced that people, I can't remember, somebody referred to this as your book, and most of your books, is big-hearted. And you did not seem too convinced about that. You're like, I don't get it. Is that real? But I think that the way, like with Jimmy, with Frida, with Duncan, with Jane, with Aggie and Gary, meeting people where they are, accepting them for who they are, that feels like love to me. That feels like big-heartedness. Are you buying it anymore now, 24 hours later?
Yeah, I thought about it. But I also think it startled me because I didn't set out to write a big-hearted novel. And I actually think that Jane is pretty frustrated in virtually every chapter. But yeah, acceptance is a big part of the novel, and really just learning to accept people. And I think that that's a big part of all relationships.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But you don't think that when you're growing up. You have some weird list of qualities that you want people to have, and it doesn't quite work out that way.
And it's not like loving my dysfunction. It wasn't on your list.
No, I don't think so.
But now when you write the parenting book and the relationship book, you're taking notes for things you'll put in those books. Yeah, for sure. Okay, great. Don't forget, folks, I'm seeing questions appear in the Q&A. That's awesome. I'm going to get to those in just a minute or two. And if you can keep them coming, that helps a lot. And that would be terrific. And you can ask about any of the books or writing or anything like that. So please type away. And that feature is working. So I'll report on that. One of the things that this is sort of place and the character and why Jimmy is who he is in his town. I mean, again, same with Duncan. I mean, Duncan was not going to get a great Yelp write-up for his business. And, neither probably was Aggie as the real estate person, but somehow they work in their town. Do you think you could drop these? The character seems so rooted in Boyne City. How do you think they would survive in, say, Bethesda here?
Oh, I think it would be a shock to their system. But I think that as I wrote it, Boyne City became a sort of mythical, magical place where people don't work that hard, and they stop over at other people's houses for dinner with no warning. And it's sort of, the deeper I got into the novel, the more I wanted things like that to happen. So I don't think Duncan and Aggie could be transplanted at this point in time, and certainly not Jimmy.
Right, right.
I like to think of them as still there.
Oh yeah.
Me happy.
No, they're fully there. I mean, this is what I'm saying, is I just think you could so walk in on them. Or like I said, open a door to Boyne City and see them, like the wardrobe, go through the line that went to the wardrobe and walk in on them.
A scene in the book where Jane's daughter has a meltdown at the beach that's so severe it's almost a psychotic break, and that's based on real life. My son had a meltdown there where he didn't recognize me. He kept screaming, "I don't know you. I want my mother." I thought people were going to think I was kidnapping him. But I wrote that scene while we were in Bethesda, and then we went to that beach last year, 2019 in the summer. And I had the weirdest feeling that we were going to see the characters there. It was such a strange, and I also thought we might see, the ghost of my younger self and my screaming son.
How much did you write in Boyne City when you saw the house there? How much did you write here or other places?
I would say it was about half and half.
Yeah. Did you fact check yourself at all, or did you just work from the mythical Boyne City for yourself? Do you know what I mean? Like, did you?
There are a lot of real places. I definitely changed things just to poetic license as they came up for whatever would work. But
right.
And there is an ice cream store called Kilwins in Boyne City that plays a big part in the book.
Yeah.
So the whole summer that I was finishing it, I was saying to my family, like, we need to go to Kilwins for research. I need to try a new.
It's urgent. It's a write-off. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's terrific. I want to so let's talk a little bit more about writing. I think this has been we should also say that the book starts in 2002, right? Mm-hmm. And then ends in 2018 or 19? 2019. 2019. And so two things is, one is that, the pandemic doesn't make its appearance. So was that a deliberate choice? And then two, I'm curious how the pandemic actually shapes, your own writing. This book and otherwise. Yeah.
I finished the book in 2019. And I actually had it end in 2020 because I naively thought it was like every year is like every other year.
No big deal. Right.
What's going to change? So then I had to go back and change that. And also I was revising the book and making edits during lockdown. And I was like, the idea that Jane and Duncan were going to bars and she was teaching school, it all seemed so sort of quaint. I felt like I was writing a historical novel. So that was weird. And then the pandemic, I think, has changed my writing life because I still have a lot of ideas and I map a lot of things out, but I'm actually less fluent at the keyboard. And I think it's because I miss the random interactions with people that are so stimulating.
Right.
And I remember shortly before the pandemic, I was at the dog park and talking to this man, and he gave the dog a 10-minute warning when it was time to go. And he wasn't being ironic or playful. And the dog took the news pretty well. And I remember just being so happy with the world when that happened, and
Yeah.
so inspired. And even though I didn't go home and write a short story about it, it made me want to go home and write. And I really miss that sort of unexpected interaction.
Yeah, that's great. That's very, I know Ann Tyler is one of your favorite authors. It feels like for sure a character walking on one of her books. And then I want to know if does the dog wear a wristwatch, or does he just have, how does he know? Is it like,
How was the dog going to know when 10 minutes was
is he
up?
counting in his head? Right.
Yeah.
Oh, this is so great. Yep, keep the questions coming. This is looking great. I'm for sure going to get to them in just a sec. And you click on the Q&A part, so not the chat, but the Q&A. That's where we will go to them. I, of course, could just talk to you about writing. I would like so you now have had a published book of short stories and 2 novels. How do you approach one versus the other? In terms of knowing when something's a short story and when it's a novel, or in terms of just like your approach to the writing? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, for most of my writing life, I felt like I couldn't write a novel. I felt it wasn't in me. I started my writing life as a poet, and then I moved on to short stories, but I felt like the train really stopped there, and I was never going to have what it took to write a longer piece. And my first novel sort of grew out of short stories, and I was sending them to my agent one at a time, and she wrote back and was like, great, I can't wait for the next chapter. And I was like, please don't say chapter, because you're really freaking me out. And but once I sort of decided that I could write a novel, I did it, and it was so much fun. I mean, it's still a lot of work, but it's really fun. And the first half is harder than the second half. By the second half, you know the characters so well that they basically just come on stage and say things. And it's like a whole nother world that you get to live in for however long you're writing the book. And short stories are the same. And but you don't have to go quite so deeply into them. Like for Early Morning Riser, I had a whole list of things about Jane and Duncan that even though things that happened that weren't in the book, I know what happened.
Right. Off stage it happened, but it was sort of part of their.
Exactly.
Yeah. And do you know an end either to a short story or to a novel when you begin?
No, not usually. It usually sort of occurs to me, and then I write my way toward it. But that's usually somewhere in the middle that I guess I have an idea. And then I'll know what the ending is. I'll sort of see it, and then I write my way to it.
One of the most awesome things about this book, I think it's true of Standard Deviation too, but really jumped out at me this time, is you just kept surprising me, and I kept being surprised by what was happening, and which was great, right? Like, again, you have these great characters, and everyone stays true to who they are, but like what was going to happen next with them, and again, I don't want to give anything away, but you just kept me turning the pages, because I was like, that's next, wait, okay, but then how does this happen? And so that was really well done. Okay, I'm going to get to other people's questions. Obviously, I could do this till midnight with you and talk about your books. I'm going to take a question from Carrie, and she says, I love your humor in your writing. Who are some of your influences or favorite authors?
Oh, well, Ann Tyler has always been a favorite of mine, and Stephen King. I don't know.
He's hilarious.
He's just about Stephen King yet, but I talk about him in every interview because I think he's so talented and amazing. I really think I can't overemphasize the effect that Heartburn and High Fidelity and Bridget Jones's Diary had on me. I read them all sort of close together in time, and they really made me understand that a comic novel can be serious too. And
smart, yeah.
Yeah, smart, exactly.
Right. Yeah. Right. It's not just banana peels and yeah. Let's see. Oh, I can't even keep up with the questions. Rhoda asks, tell us about your own reading life. Whose books feel like members of your book family? You got a little bit of that with your favorite authors, but I like this idea of your book family.
I like that idea too. Well, I think that when I'm writing, I tend to read a lot of nonfiction, because if I'm writing and I read something good, then I become convinced that whatever I'm writing is not good.
Right.
And if I read something bad, then I'm convinced that what I'm writing is bad. So it's like the little tiny window between hungover and drunk that I have to fit the reading list into. So often I reread books.
Yeah, while you're deep in the writing.
Yeah.
Because you know where you and that book stand. And
then when I take a break from writing, I suddenly, all these new books will rush in and inspire me. Mm-hmm. But I would say there's a lot of Stephen King in my book family, a lot of Anne Tyler. There's a British author named Alice Thomas Ellis that I really like. Wow, I'm struggling to think, but okay. Alice Munro.
Oh yeah. Again, I could keep talking about that. Somebody asks, anonymous attendee asks, why was it right for Jane's character to be a teacher? Why was that? Why did that hit the right spot for Jane?
Well, it mainly started because of the pajama day thing, but I think that writing the classroom scenes were some of the funnest, and I made her a second grade teacher because I think 7-year-olds are a very funny age, because they're articulate, but they really don't understand very much, and they sort of still need their coats zipped up, but like zipping up the coat of somebody with an adult's, command of the language. And I knew as soon as I made Jane a teacher that there would be a field trip that she went on that would be an amalgamation of the worst field trips that I went on as a chaperone with my children. And there was one where all the chickens banded together. We were at a farm, and they picked on the new chicken until he played dead, but his heart was beating and his fluffer. Oh, I can't even, it was the saddest thing I ever saw. And like 26-year-olds started crying. So yeah, field trips, I knew that would play a big part.
Yeah, and her co-teacher at this field trip, sort of deals with it via a flask. That's the way he's going to get through the field trip. He's near retirement. And yeah, he's coping. That's his coping.
For years.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I do want to say about her though that she is imperfect as well. I mean, that she's not like sort of Susie Sunshine teacher. Some days she is, but other days she's superhuman as well. I mean, she's got her flaws. There's days where she just plays movie after movie for the kids. As much as we're saying nobody is the villain, there's nobody perfect. So, and that's also what is so endearing about these characters.
But I think that Jane is a much better teacher than I'd be. I think I should have done way more movies, lots more movies.
But she wanted to be a teacher, in fairness.
Yeah.
She's great. Let's see. I'm trying to get to some of these other questions. Some are asked by Ian McCready, and I don't know if I dare venture towards those questions. Also known as Mr. Katherine Heiny. But he does ask one that I am going to ask. Would you say that Jane is fulfilled at the end of the book? It's Mr. Ian McCready's question.
I was so scared of what my husband's question would be.
I'm editing them. Don't worry.
I thought it was going to be like, what do you want for dinner?
Yeah, right. Where's the salt? Right.
Yeah, I just spilled something. But actually, I can include Ian in my answer because he told me recently about a TED Talk about video games and how video games are actually a good preparation for life, because in a video game, when you go to the next level or you complete the game, it's not a straight line that you fall in a river or your character gets killed or you have to storm a castle. That there's always sort of like failure and then growth, and the line is very jagged, and that life is like that. Probably there are some very charmed people who go from A to Z,
just stair step.
right?
Yeah.
But and so I think that Jane ends up with a better version of what she wanted due to the challenges along the way.
Yeah. I hope Ian's buying that. We'll have to find out later. Stay tuned for dessert, everybody. Everyone's really into this dinner party idea and has questions about these dinner party ideas. Frank wants to know, I'm gonna butcher his name, or try not to, so I'll skip it. Which character would you most like to have over for dinner? And what more would you want to know about them? So which character from Early Morning Riser would you like to actually have over to your house for dinner? And what more would you like to know about them? And it could be a future them.
God.
About that. Like, what about if, not Aggie, I would say. Although you wouldn't have to do anything, so.
Yeah, she would cook dinner, but she would be really passive aggressive. I wouldn't want to serve Aggie anything. I might choose Frida because she'd play music and that would make me happy, but probably I would choose Jane because she's very much like me and we would get along.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to go wrong, with any of them. So Carla has a question. She wants to know, how do you decide if a situation, theme, or character might be better suited for a short story or better suited for a novel? How do you decide if a situation, theme, or character might be better suited for a short story or a novel? Or do you just start writing and see where you get, or?
Well, I think that both novels that I've written, I sort of backed into a little bit by writing a short story and then realizing I wanted to know more about these characters. So now I'm going to talk about Stephen King again and say that he says that when you write a novel, you get an idea and then you get sort of another idea and then you get another one. And for years and years and years, I thought that was the most unhelpful advice in history. But
thanks, Stephen King. Right.
Yeah, I was like, for you today. But I found that it's sort of the way it works. You just take an idea and you start expanding it. And I don't know that I'm necessarily thinking in terms of themes and epics and novels when I start writing. I'm usually just trying to write a joke because I'm basically really insecure and I always think nobody will read what I write unless it's funny.
Well, I'm going to indulge a little bit as the questioner or whatever my role is. But you have these gems of sentences and they're just everywhere in the book. And I think this is part of, this is a major strength of your writing, to my mind, having read a lot of things of yours, which is just these turns of phrase, little things that you don't, it's the unexpected. Sometimes it's a whole book that's unexpected, chapter by chapter. Sometimes it's these turns of phrase, which are just so great. So I'm gonna, again, some of these are deeper in the books. I'm not gonna give you too much context, but they do stand alone. And to me, as I started gathering them, they were reminding me, it was sort of the reverse of a New Yorker cartoon where like, this is the language and then I wanted somebody to draw it. Because that's how strong and funny they were and just could stand alone. So one of them is, that was how Jane remembered it from her own childhood. You couldn't and you couldn't, and then one day the switch flipped and you just could, much like turning a pancake or reading a map or putting on a condom. And it was that last bump, which was just so brilliant. Yeah, I have to warn people as you read the book. I mean, nobody's on the metro these days, but just, if you're in public, you just be ready to guffaw. Another one, I'm going to read another one of these sort of what I love, these little New Yorker moments. I myself, this is Jane's mom, I believe. I myself believe I've lived so long due to my lifelong avoidance of alcohol that, and I always vote for whichever presidential candidate seems most likely to win. It has saved me untold disappointment, which in Washington doesn't feel so apolitical. I loved that little bit. And again, I could sort of have something very visual there, which I loved. I want to ask you another, questions are coming in, and I'm just being indulgent. Do you feel like you have a very specific prose style? You pointed to some humor. If so, how would you describe it? Or do you like to experiment with different styles? I think you have a very strong voice, but I'm curious what you think.
I think I experimented more with styles when I was younger, and I would read something by Pam Houston and suddenly be like, I have to write in the second person. And sometimes I'll read a book with a very strong first person voice, and then I want to write in the first person, but I hardly ever do. I don't know. I like to say things in parentheses a lot. I think that's just another way to work in a joke. So I really like doing that. I'm not sure how I would describe my prose style. I tend to I think I tend to write very traditional books with chapters and quotation marks and all that stuff. But I read all sorts of books with different writing styles, and there's so much variety and so much to admire.
I mean, to me, and this might be my own bias coming from radio, but they are so, they do just jump off the page as in terms of dialogue, in terms of, you can just see so much of what you're writing, and not because you're not through, long descriptions of sunsets as much as you were tempted, but there's always something, something verbal. There's always a notation. Another little of these gems. A tear splashed into Jane's drink, and she shook her head again. You needed romantic love to be happy. It was right up there with garlic bread, which is just, it's hilarious. So again, it's sort of a parenthetical aside, but so you don't ever let yourself get into this treacly, as much as this is, maybe that's why you think it's not big-hearted, because you're not treacly big-hearted. You're not, a big teddy bear big-hearted, but there is something open and invitational and warm. What do you think?
Yeah. And I think that actually whenever I feel like things are getting too sweet, I will add a joke, and it sort of brings it back to the middle for me.
And that's why Duncan is such a great character, right? Because he's not, he's quite, and I think as well the imperfections work very well, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, I think people are made of their imperfections, kind of. Can I just quick give a shout out to a couple of books?
Please, yeah.
I just want to talk about some books that I read that came out during the pandemic that which I think was a really hard time to publish a book. And actually during lockdown itself, I could only read the Little House on the Prairie series. I was like, it has to be that. Nothing more challenging, nothing less familiar. And then I read a memoir called Notes on a Silencing by Lacey Crawford. And it was—
What's it called again?
It's called Notes on the Silencing. And it's such a powerful story, but it's so beautifully written. And Lacey was kind enough to let me completely fangirl all over her page and was just so gracious about it, when another person probably would have reported me for stalking. And then I read In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. And that was another memoir that was just super powerful. And again, beautifully written, so beautifully written that you would think you were reading a novel. And I did read a novel called The Body in Question by Jill Cement that came out during lockdown, or maybe it came out a little before that, but it's a brilliant novel about serving on a jury, and it's kind of a long fever dream. And the last book that I want to talk about is I went to the University of Kansas, And a couple months ago, I was on Facebook scrolling through on my phone, and I saw this tiny little thumbnail under people you might know. And I looked at this man and I thought, oh my God, I sat behind him in a government class and he had the most beautiful handwriting. And then later I saw him when I was drunk at a party in my dorm in the elevator. And I told him he had the greatest handwriting, and he looked really scared and he got off at the next floor, which I'm sure wasn't even his floor. But I saw him on Facebook, so I reached out to him and it was him. And he turns out to be this very great poet. His name is Michael Kleber Diggs, and he has a poetry collection coming out in June called Worldly Things. And it's just really smart and luminous and funny and important. And it's like all the things that you want poetry to be, and it so often isn't. So it's really a lesson on how KU is still enriching my life. It's reached me through Facebook. So so many writers have really given me hope and inspiration throughout the pandemic. So I wanted to give a shout out to all of them.
Yeah, for sure. Books have been, I totally agree, life-saving. Okay, I can't let you go without answering this question that 3 people thumbs up. And the person who asked it was Carrie, a different Carrie. What was the worst dinner mishap in your adult life?
Oh,
Let's
wow.
see.
I don't know. My husband used to be a diplomat, so we had a lot of dinner parties. There was one where I knew who I was going to sit by ahead of time, and I found out that her husband and I had the same hairdresser, which I thought was like the most exciting thing ever. So right away I was like, you won't believe it, but your husband and I get our hair cut by the same person. And she was like, we're divorced. And I was like, would you like more salad? You know, it's just like, that's really me, is to be like all worked up about how great it's going to be. And then our house.
Like that's a good 10 minutes, right?
Yeah. And then it's like 5 seconds. Exactly.
Very funny. Oh, Ian McCready also has a question about the success of a happy marriage. Is it low expectations? Is that going in the marriage book?
Yeah, I think it should. It was actually, that was a joke in my first book, because on International Day at my children's school, which is this thing I talked about forever and how stressful it was, and I had to be at school early, and he was going to have to get the children breakfast. And he was like, on the day of, he's like, what are you talking about? And I told a friend of mine about it, and she was like, oh, hey, low expectations are the key to a happy marriage. And I was like, well, maybe that's true. Yeah.
That's terrific. Okay, let's see. I mean, I'm scrolling through. Somebody had Standard Deviation as their as a book club, and they loved it. Their book club loved it. Oh, this is a fun one. The colors are similar to other contemporary novels covers. Is it the same graphic designer or publishing house? I actually thought your 3 books together looked like they belonged together. Even though they're very different covers, but I felt like they were very complementary. Did you give that much? I know it's hard to usually have input on that.
Oh, well.
Although I know you're passionate about it.
Knopf was very, very kind about my input, and I seriously feared that maybe 2 people from the art department would be sent around to strangle me if I rejected another cover. But they were so patient about coming up with design after design. And then for all 3 of my books, the one that we finally landed on was just
perfect.
On the day I saw it, I couldn't stop looking at it. I just kept calling it up and calling it up. So I've been so lucky to have such beautiful artwork.
And quickly before we get cut off, what's next? Do you know what's next for you in terms of what you're working on? Novel, short stories, all the above, a play, a 1-act?
I'm working on a story collection, which is kind of fun after coming off such an intense novel. And one of the first stories that I wrote for it is about a woman who gets really drunk at the airport. And everybody I've told about it looks really nervous and says, "Is it about me?"
Is it me?
So it's not. It's about me. But well, thank you. This has been the funnest event ever.
Thank you guys both so much. I really love the conversation. I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank everybody in our audience for joining us, and gently remind them that it's hard for Politics and Prose to continue to host events like this without the book sales to support them. So if you haven't purchased the book yet, I have put the link in the chat. It takes you right to the Politics and Prose website. In the meantime, I hope you'll visit our website for the latest event listings, and we'd love to see you there. And in the meantime, stay well and well read. And thank you, Justine and Katherine, again for such a lovely conversation. And have a good evening, everyone. Take care.
Thank you. Congratulations, Katherine.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.